Evening, everybody. Evening. You all right? You found us? Right. Thank you very much indeed for attending. This is the NACO open meeting in relation to the changes to the pensions that we've been talking about over the last few weeks. A specific welcome to people on YouTube. If you all shout yes, they'll know there's lots of people in the audience. Going out live. Is it? Anyway, so then basically, yes, we're very, this is a new venture for NACO to do something like this. We are experimenting with this. It's a real trial, so please bear with us. First of all, my name is Bob Lister. I'm the Assistant Secretary at NACO, standing in presently for Neil Buse, General Secretary, who's unfortunately currently off sick. To my left is Gary Dewing, some of you will know, is the Director of Pensions, Reward and Benefits from the Co-operative Group. On my right is Gwyn Bates, who's an independent consultant working with NACO as we go through these pension consultations. Also, you may have seen at the back there is Rachel Newton from the Co-operative Credit Union, who's very, very keen to talk to you as well, to talk to you about the benefits of being in the credit union. Goes on the door, so you'll see those people as well. Okay, just a few domestics before we get started, if I can, and house rules. There's no fire alarm expected, so if there's a fire alarm, we need to go back through these doors at the back here and congregate by the Spar supermarket, which obviously was with the Co-operative meeting won't go particularly well, but I'm afraid that's what we're going to do. The toilets, if you need a toilet stall, they're back through towards reception, just on your left-hand side. Basically, onto the people on YouTube, we're going to be noting your questions in the chat window, and we'll try and ask as many of those as possible at the end of Gary's presentation. We'll also say, because this is being mic'd up for YouTube, I'm going to ask that everybody is as quiet as they possibly can be, so this doesn't work. Otherwise, it's apparently it becomes a bit inaudible for people to hear if you're going through the YouTube channel. So if I can ask you to do that, that would be really, really helpful. Okay, just a little bit about the plan for tonight. We're going to shortly ask Gary to do a presentation on the updated position where we are with the challenges and the pensions consultations currently. Then we're going to have a question and answer session for Gary, so that obviously we can ask all the things you need to ask, and again through the YouTube too. At the end of that, which we hope in sort of 3/4 an hour, depending on the questions we get, then we're going to ask Gary to leave, so that obviously we can talk to NACO members specifically about their views, comments, thoughts, so we can take this forward with the consultations and move forward. So that's the plan today. Hopefully at the latest we should get you out for about 7:30. So that's the plan. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Gary to do his presentation, and just for attending.
Thank you, Paul. My daughter wouldn't believe I was on YouTube. I'm pretty certain she isn't watching me. Although she get a chance to see me, as you might imagine, things have been pretty intense since we announced proposed changes to the pension scheme. I recognise a fair few faces here today, so you will have heard some of this before. But in conjunction with the conversation we've had with Bob, NACO, and also the trade unions, it's not only the member presentation that we're going to cover in a little bit of detail today, but it's also the kind of business case, because the business case is central to this. And I wanted to start with something that you might have heard me say before, and we've also got in the room here Andy Clark, who's the Head of Employee Relations. Andy tells me not to say what I'm about to tell you. But I've ignored him so far, and I'm going to ignore him again, because if I was sat where you're sat, I'd want to know something about my own credentials. The guy that stood in front of you telling you things must change. And I won't spend very long on this, but I do think it is important, because it would be important to me, and I'm hoping it would resonate in some way with yourselves. I'm a member of the pension scheme. I've worked for the group for 11 years. In all my time, apart from very recently, my role has been to look after this pension scheme. My role's broad, and now I look after both reward and benefits. But I joined in 2004 as a member of the group scheme. Nobody is a bigger advocate of defined benefit pension schemes than me. It's what I've done all my career, and it's what I've done for the group. The pension scheme is well run, but I actually believe that the proposals we're talking to you about today and that we announced a month ago are essential. It is essential we make change. And you know, sometimes in positions in organisations, you have to say things which actually maybe 100% you don't buy. We've all maybe done it to some degree. But I absolutely believe this is the right thing to do in terms of changes. I'm not saying that this consultation is a done deal and everything is decided. But what I am saying is I absolutely believe change is essential. And change is essential because first and foremost, my job and the job of the trustees is to protect what has been built up. That is the primary responsibility. So I'll get into the presentation now. I just wanted to share that with you in terms of my own personal position and my professional position. Now, Matt said to glare at him if the slides aren't moving on, so I'm giving him my best Paddington Bear glare.
Try again.
Thank you. I'm not going to slavishly stick to this agenda. I just want to go through a bit of the story because the story is really important because not everybody is in the same place in terms of within the co-op group. Things have changed a lot in recent times. And I think it's important we all just understand where the group is overall, where our people are. So we'll go through the current position and the journey we've been on, the need for change, the proposal itself, which you'll be familiar with, and some updated developments there as we progress through consultation. Focus on who this impacts on most and where those people reside. Talk a little bit about the consultation and give you an update because we are a month into the process, so I can give you an update on where we are there, what the themes are. And then in terms of the next steps with regards to the process itself. So forgive me because many of you, I guess, will know this already, but I do think it's important that we just bear in mind the different populations we have within the group. So back in 2006, we had 3 final salary schemes. So the group, the bank and the CIS scheme. They are final salary schemes, or were final salary schemes, and we merged them into the pay scheme and launched the pay scheme. The pay scheme is also defined benefit in terms of its basis, but it's career average. So it's not linked to final salary, it's linked to inflation. So for many people, I'm sure a number in the room, you have 2 tranches of benefits. Benefits that you built up to 2006, which are linked to your final salary until you draw the benefits or until you leave the organisation. And then from 2006, you've defined benefit, pension, but linked to inflation, not to final salary. So we moved forward to 2012. We went from 1 pension scheme in 2006 to 10 pension schemes through acquisitions and mergers. So Lothian, United, again, you will know this, and you may well be members of some of the schemes, Yorkshire, Leeds, Sheffield, etc. So by 2012, we still had 10 pension schemes. And we undertook a review of the pension position there because we had 9 schemes of final salary links, essentially, the pay scheme, and we also had automatic enrolment coming down the line. So automatic enrolment where we have to automatically enrol people that earn over a certain amount of money. So we undertook a review at that stage. Now, at that time, I went to the board and to the group executive and said, we have a choice here. We have a choice to make in terms of what we do for the future. And I said, if this was my business, I would say at that time, because we were looking at a deficit across the pension schemes of over £1 billion, if this was my call, it was my business, as much as it would pay me to do it, I would say we should stop all defined benefit accrual to the future and we should move to defined contribution. Because I was worried about the risk we were running in those pension schemes. The business was not content with that, and the business did not feel that was necessary at the time. So what we did, we closed the 9 schemes, which were our acquired schemes, as we referred to them, and we moved everybody into PACE. What that means is for a big tranche of people in 2012, they've got a final salary link for the benefits they built up until 2012. And after 2012, they joined the PACE scheme and built benefits up on a defined benefit basis but inflation linked, not final salary linked. 2015, where are we now? So only 3 years from the last review. Where are we now? Well, we've started to merge some of the schemes into PACE because ultimately we'd like all the pension schemes into PACE if we could. And that would save us in terms of governance costs, administrative costs. It's better in many ways to be in the biggest scheme with the most sophisticated investment strategy, etc. But the defined benefit costs have continued to rise, and I'm going to come on to that in a bit more detail. They've risen really significantly. In addition to that, our defined contribution costs. So we launched as part of the changes in 2012 through automatic enrolment. We automatically enrolled 40,000 people, of whom about 32,000 were group employees. Those costs rise from 2017, and that's part of the story here about pension costs rising. So we undertook another review, and that's why I'm stood here today to talk to you about the changes that we announced in May. So in terms of the current position, this is just a bit of a snapshot of the co-op universe, if you like. So something like 70,000 employees. So the blue quadrant, quite a quadrant, you know what I mean? DB PACE complete. They're the people, probably many in this room, who are most affected by the proposals. And then the orange and green, they're people in our DC scheme. So PACE Extra is our top tier defined contribution scheme. And PACE Essential is our automatic enrolment tier of DC. So we've got about, what's that, 31,000, 30 people in DC. And we've best part of 30,000 people not in any pension scheme at all. They could join the pension scheme, but have chosen not to, and they don't meet the automatic enrolment criteria. So because they don't meet that, we don't automatically make them join the automatic enrolment. So that's the current position. And then, without going through each of these in detail, you can just start to see some of the profiles. So there's no non-members here. I've taken non-members out of this chart. But again, the blue in each of the functions shows you the DB people, the people that are PACE complete. The orange is the people in the top tier of the DC, and the green is the people who are in our lowest tier, our automatic enrolment tier of the DC scheme. They can join, of course. The people in those tiers can trade up to PACE Extra, and if they've done 2 years service, they can join PACE complete as things currently stand. So that's just a bit of a snapshot in terms of how our business looks. And that's what I mean when I say it's important we recognise that not everybody's in the same place. So in terms of our current position, so our pension liabilities across all of our pension schemes totals £10 billion. That provides benefits, or will provide benefits, to 175,000 people. As I showed in the previous chart, about 8,300 of those are current active employees. The deficit across all our pension schemes at the minute is £450 million. So PACE is 100 million, United is 150 million, etc., etc. But that isn't fixed, and that's really important to know because the deficit is volatile. And at any point, every 3 years, you do evaluation of every pension scheme. And you take a snapshot of the position, and you look at the funding, and you look at the strength of the business, and you look at the assumptions, and you recast the funding position of the scheme. So currently it's 450 million. But that 1 in 20 risk is not some theoretical mumbo jumbo just out to scare people. The deficit in the last 3 or 4 years at times has been over £1 billion. Now, the only people that pay for the past in terms of the benefits we've built up are the group. So that deficit sits solely on the group. It's the group's job to fund that. And it's doing that at the minute, and it'll have to do whatever the deficit is. We currently spend 106 million a year on pensions, and that's due to increase. It's due to increase as soon as April 16, because the employer contribution to the DB scheme is due to increase to 23%. So currently it's 18% is what the business pays. You pay 8% if you're in PACE complete. The business pays 18, but from April it will go to 23%. So that's another 13 million on top of the 106 million we're currently paying. But that isn't the end of it either, because PACE is going through its next valuation cycle. So from April 16, it starts its next valuation cycle. And I am absolutely certain that the contribution rate would increase again. So if you think of where we get to by April 16, 23% from the business, 8% from you, that's a 31% contribution in total. But it's heading north of that. It could well be 35%, 30%, 36%, 40% within a couple of valuations' time. Now, the reason for that is two or threefold, but people are living longer, interest rates are low. Another issue is the fact that the degree of prudency that is actually baked into the assumptions. Trustees have to protect what's been built up. To do that, they take less risk. The investment strategy has less risk than it's ever had before. But what that does is it pushes up the cost of the scheme in essence, because you're taking less risk. So that's what we find ourselves in terms of the contributions. That's what we're looking at. In April 16, if we do nothing else and keep the scheme open, the contribution rate will be 23% for the group. DB members pay 8%. That's what you currently pay. Something I'm really keen to impress upon you is actually that if we kept this scheme open, the contribution rate couldn't possibly remain at 8%. If you think of the long-term contribution rate, let's say for argument's sake it's 35%. How much would you pay personally? Would you pay half of that? Would you pay 10%? Would you pay 15%? Would you pay 20%? The genuine question, and maybe we'll come on to that in the Q&As. We talked about populations as well. So with 30,000 people who are in the DC scheme that currently receive 2%. But that is due to increase. 2017 it increases, in 2018 it'll increase further. So that's our current position. That's the position we're currently looking at. And this is really the heart of it in terms of where we are. As I say, the business is in rebuild. The business is a smaller business than it was a few years ago. We've got to control costs and risks. I think the challenge from a DB point of view is that you can't really control the costs and risks because we have a £10 billion pension liability that's got to be funded by the group. Whatever happens, the group has got to fund it. The cost is increasing. That's just known costs increasing. Not only are the costs increasing for the group, but if we keep the scheme open to 2018, so the current sort of financial cycle we're looking at, we'd add another £300 million of pension onto the 10 billion we already have. But that 300 million sum, it's not as if that's the definitive cost or the definitive liability. The cost could be considerably more than that. The size of liability could be more than that. People living longer, as I say, there are a number of reasons for that. So the group's going to pay for the past whatever it does with the future. The group pays, if it's 106 million, about 55 of that goes to pay deficits. So about 50, 55 of it goes to pay to the 450 million I've outlined across those schemes. But as we go through the valuation cycles, the group will be required to look at those funding plans. And if the deficits have gone up, it will be asked to pay more. Or it will be asked to pay the same amount for a lot longer. It depends on what the group can actually afford. The second point, beyond cost and risk, is about equity. And I think this is a very dangerous area to stray into because fairness isn't somewhere I think we should really focus on today, because actually I think fairness is very subjective. What's fair to me may well not be fair to you. But what is true in terms of the facts is that the way we spend our money on pensions at the minute, there is a distortion, a disparity, if you like, in terms of where our money is spent and who it goes to. So we've got 23% will be the contribution rate for people in the DB scheme, and 2% will be the contribution to the DC scheme. So that jars, it certainly jars with me. And like I said, I'm in this category. I'm in the 23% category, but it still jars with me. And as you say, of the 106 million, 90% of that goes to the DB scheme, not just the DB members, not just the 8,000. It's paying for all of the past, all of that £10 billion of pension liabilities. It's paying towards that, the 175,000 people I talked about. So that's brought me to the place which says to the board and to the executive, we've got to be responsible. We've got to take action. As unpalatable as it is, and as painful as it is, I do believe it is essential that we make changes. And this takes on, I think, to the proposal itself. Thank you. So, in summary, PACE DB to be closed to future accrual, the link to final salary to be broken. We talked about the final salary link. People talk about benefits being frozen. Frozen is a misnomer because they're not frozen, they're linked to inflation. So whatever's been built up will be protected and will be increased and linked to inflation in the future, up till retirement age. And then when it's in payment, it will also be linked to inflation. But it's important. People use the word frozen, I understand why they do that, but it's not frozen. The future pension offer under the proposal is that it would be defined contribution. I'll come to that in a little bit more detail, but I know we're conscious I want to leave plenty of time for questions. The defined contribution is the basis going forward. The DC scheme currently exists. As you can see, tiers A and D are here right now. The group has proposed that actually we introduce some new tiers, B, C, and E. B and C really were just to bring forward what we were going to do anyway. We were going to bring these new contribution tiers through in 2017 and 2018, and in line with the government requirements. I mean, it's considerably more generous than the government requires us to be, but we're bringing those forward to give people an opportunity to move through those tiers, maybe with less pain, but make it easier to actually go from tier A through to tier D or E if they wish. But crucially, introduce a new tier, which enables colleagues to get a 10% employer contribution, 10% of the pay contribution. The other aspect that was introduced as part of the proposal is that if you're in a DB scheme, you're in PACE DB, and you move into PACE DC, we'll provide an extra 3 times life cover. So that would give people 6 times their basic pay life cover. One other addition, which is pretty much hot off the press, is that through talking to the trade unions, we are also in early stages, but reasonably well developed in terms of offering people in the DB scheme an income protection scheme. Because the ill health early retirement terms aren't as good, because we move into DC, and I can answer that in questions if you wish. But an income protection product, which would give people protection should they not be able to work due to illness. Still in early stages, it wasn't part of the original proposal. It's through the negotiation discussions with NACO and the trade unions. There's a view that all defined contribution schemes are poor, and there's a reason for that. I mean, it's a myth in the main, but the reason for it is in the main that people don't pay enough into them. If you pay a small amount in, then the pension that you get out is probably not going to be sufficient. But all we've done here is just highlight what some other employers offer in terms of their DC schemes. The contribution ratio refers to what employer pays versus employee pays. So a lot of schemes have a 1-to-1 match. You pay £1, the business pays £1. The groups is broadly 2-to-1, as you saw from the previous slide. So you pay 4%, the business pays 8%, with a maximum contribution under the proposal at 10%. So it is a good DC scheme. I'm not suggesting it is as good as the current DB scheme, but it is a good DC scheme. We're very conscious that actually this proposal impacts people in the DB scheme the most. 8,300 of us are currently in PACE complete, and the best part of 5,000 have a final salary link as well. So of the 8,300, 5,000 have a final salary link from 2006 or 2012. We've talked about the extra life cover. We've talked about increased security, and this is one of the central tenets of the proposal, is to make sure that we can honour those commitments for the £10 billion of the pension liabilities and 175,000 beneficiaries. And we do believe it is a good quality DC scheme for the future. The DC population have been pretty quiet through the consultation, as you might imagine. Maybe in many ways because actually what they can see is an increase to the employer contribution. If they're currently accessing the top tier of DC, they can only get 8%, but to the proposal get 10%. And then to the thousands of people that aren't in the pension scheme, but we're very welcome to join it, we've written to those people as well. And again, you may well know people in the organisation that aren't a member of the scheme, but we've written to them as well so that they know the options for the future have changed. So in terms of DB members, again, we know where they are located, and we know how many are salary links. So we're trying to, as much as we can, I mean, I can see some faces that are familiar. So you know we've been running sessions in Angel Square and also in Military. We've been to depots, distribution centres. I've just done a video, would you believe, where we're actually trying to reach as many people as we possibly can. But we're very conscious of the fact that this affects DB members the most, And this is how we're trying to highlight and get to as many of those colleagues as possible. So I won't dwell on this too much because some of you will have seen this in the presentations, but the purpose of this was just to show the change on the final salary proposal. So the top line is the current position. So if you've done 10 years in the old scheme, this is still linked to final salary. So you've worked in the old group scheme, you've got 10 years, you'd have 10/60ths times your salary at retirement or the day you left. So that's how the calculation currently works. Under the proposal, if the final salary link ceased, what would happen is you'd still have 10/60ths. No one's taking that accrued service away. But it would be broadly your salary at October 15. I say broadly because there's scheme rules in terms of looking at your salary over a period of time, rather than just picking that one day, if you like. 10/60ths of your salary at the time, and then going forward, it would be linked to inflation. That's the difference in terms of the proposal. Pays complete, career average, think of it in terms of pension bricks. So not linked to final salary. Every year you build up a year of pension. You get 1/60th, so £20,000 divided by 60. That pension brick is linked in line with inflation between the day you earn it and the day you draw it. And each one of your pension bricks works in that same way. What would happen in the proposal is nobody would take any of that away. Everything that's been built up is yours and would still be linked to inflation, but you would build up no more pension bricks. Because in the proposal, you would then move to defined contribution. Defined contribution, you have a choice. It's essentially a pot of money in a tax-efficient wrapper. Now, I talked about the downside of DC schemes is often about what goes in. The other downside, or what can be a downside, is the fact that the risk is on you as the employee, because there's a risk transference, isn't there, in essence? DB, the risk is on the group, so the risk sits with the group's going to pay for the past whatever happens, but pay for the promise whatever happens. Defined contribution moves the risk to employees. So you pay a contribution, goes into account, the employer pays his contribution into the account, it's tax relief, grows over time, it's invested. The way in which it's invested depends to some degree on you. You can choose from a range of options through Legal and General, who are our third-party provider. You can do that. But the trustees realise that most colleagues, most members of the pension scheme aren't going to be picking stocks. They have a lifestyle fund. 99% of people have a lifestyle fund. The purpose of a lifestyle fund is to change as you get older. You get nearer to retirement, the fund takes less risk for you. So whilst the investment risk is on the individual, there is the trustee responsibility and role to make sure the lifestyle fund is fit for purpose. But the onus is very much on colleagues to understand what the pension can give them and to monitor it carefully and to understand what they need in retirement. I'm going to come on to that because over the last month or so, really hardened my view in terms of what we need to do more for colleagues to understand pensions and to understand what they need in retirement. So in terms of what happens, you have DB and DC, defined benefit and defined contribution. Your defined benefit pension is in a very prescribed format. So you take 25% of tax-free cash, you take the rest in the format of a pension in the way that the pension scheme rules dictate it. So it comes with a spouse's pension, it comes increasing in line with inflation. Defined contribution is a different proposition because you've more flexibility. You can take 25% of that as a tax-free cash sum. The rest, you can do what you like with in many ways. You can buy an annuity, and the trustee have enabled people to do that in a very efficient way by using an annuity broking service that will get you the best annuity. That's baked into the scheme. But the government recognise that annuities aren't great products and are expensive products, and therefore there's more flexibility. So there'll be more choices in terms of how you can take that. You could just draw that money down in time if you need to, rather than to buy an annuity. But again, this is part of the education process. Financial well-being is my current watchword, something we've got to do an awful lot more of throughout the group. So in terms of consultation, so it's a minimum of 60 days, ends at the end of July. It absolutely will be meaningful. We're talking to trade unions, obviously I'm here today, and we've very much re-engaged with them since this slide was written. Where are we right now? So in terms of themes, so this is as of the 22nd of June, so I've got a bit more of an update for you and that's slightly more up to date. But we've written to 70,800 people. We've had about 2,000 visits now to the consultation website. Most of those people are the DB scheme. Back to this point about who's affected most. So the majority of people are DB members. We've done considerably more than 20 presentations now, and with more scheduled. We've just done a video. That's to get to as many people in our stores and in our locations as much as we can. Obviously, we've been to depots, but the idea being the video would help people get greater access. And we're going to tally that up with and marry that up with some conference calls. We've had about 350 pieces of feedback so far. So the 2,000 people that have been on the website, most have used the modeler, the calculation modeler. Half have looked at the questions and answers, but only 350 have left feedback. Now, people may be planning to come back, maybe after discussion with their trade union about what those comments might be, but I urge you to input to the consultation with your feedback. What are the themes? There's a few really key themes. One is, don't close DB, close it to new members, but keep it for those that are in it. Another theme is, I understand the changes you're making, but don't take away the final salary link. Keep the final salary link. Another one is the contribution rates in the DC scheme could be improved, could be more than 10%. Another theme is this happening to everybody? What's happening to the executives? What's happening to senior managers? Are they part of this? So that's the theme. Well, that's the themes that have come through so far. Oh. Not entirely sure what's coming next, but pretty much actually that is pretty much the end anyway now. But in terms of the presentation, I think the real meat of this though is I'm pretty certain in the questions. So happy to go. Yeah, just take a second.
Thanks very much, Gary. I think it's interesting to listen to what Gary's saying because he's absolutely right that the trade unions are meeting with Gary and the team on a regular sort of basis to come back with any sort of feedback that we get from our membership. We believe in NACO that we've got the majority of our members in the group will probably be members of the DB scheme. I think it's very, very important therefore obviously as much feedback as we can possibly get via the NACO portal, but the group need to know as much as they possibly can about your questions and your concerns, and that's the purpose of the meeting today. I think you can, obviously Gary's been into a lot of detail and it's very thought-provoking in terms of exactly what the challenges are here. And the TUs, ourselves, NACO and Unite and Usdor are working very, very hard to ensure that whatever changes have to come through, are done through and in proper consultation and work with the businesses closely. The TUs, I've got to say this right now, have not accepted the fact that this scheme we've presently got has to change dramatically. We won't say that right now. The realists within the room will probably think we've no option, guys, but the fact of the matter is the trade unions have certainly not accepted this is where we're going to be. We want to challenge it. We want to come up with other ideas. We need your feedback, as much information as we possibly can to take these meetings we're having on a regular basis until the end of the consultation. As Gary said, the consultation continues to the end of July. Any changes will not be coming through until October at the earliest. So the plan is, we need to get as much feedback from you as we possibly can. So if I can, what I'm going to do is, obviously for this point, is sort of take any questions that you've got for Gary, and obviously hopefully we'll get some from the viewers on YouTube as well. Is that right, Mark? We're getting quite a few coming through?
No.
Not as many as we'd hoped, so we're looking to the floor for those questions, but I'm sure you have got plenty. So we'll start off and we'll see how we go with that. Gary, there's a gentleman there was handled.
You'll realise that there's a multitude of issues I have at the moment with regards to the changes in the pension plan. Obviously, one was being a member of the DB scheme. Secondly, as a trustee of the Foreign Borders Fund, we just recently merged, and obviously didn't realise that this was going to come as quick as it is. But my third point and my key point was that I was a CWS trustee prior to 2006, and I was also on the working group, the created PACE, and at that time argued, and would still agree that PACE was a fantastic scheme. However, at that time, we were given a multitude of assurances that had we dealt with the pensions problem at that time, the future benefit, that the rights prior to 2006 would be preserved. And I remember a colleague of mine on that committee arguing for an indefinite underpin, not something that you ever going to get. And actually, my point to you was that it is our recollection that there was an underpin agreed for 10 years, which would take us to 2060. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. There is a 10-year underpin.
So therefore, you cannot define final salary until 2016, not 2050.
The underpin, though, Jared, is is in terms of an inflation-linked underpin. So it's pretty detailed for here, but it was that there would be
I'm still trying to find the people.
Yeah, but we're not hiding anything here. In terms of making the change that's proposed, the group can make that change to cease the final salary link, but it absolutely has to honour the inflation link forever going forward.
Can you clarify obviously that's RPI, not CPI?
It is RPI. This is a scheme rule principle, of course, here. The proposals aren't changing the nature of how the schemes are revalued. So inflation is defined in scheme rules. For the vast majority of our pension schemes, RPI is the factor. There are some tranches of membership which the trade unions have asked for, where the scheme rules would say if you go from active status to deferred status, it's CPI, but it's a significant minority. But that question has been asked. Thank you.
My name is Stephen Lewis. I work for the group. I suppose I kind of sit a bit more in the camp of the realists, unfortunately, and I feel like this is probably something that's going to be difficult to battle against. But my two questions are sort of this. Last year, we had a report from the pension scheme, which was sort of, there was an issue, it looked like it was I think it was about 104 million, I apologize if I'm wrong on figures. And then in 2019, the feeling was that we should be looking to actually get rid of this. We're in a good place. A year rolls on, and we're looking at another sort of 350 million suddenly appear, and it's quite scary. And I'm wondering, surely we would have had sort of alarm bells back then. And that's one half of the question. The other half of the question is one you alluded to before, which comes through from the commentary that's coming through from feedback you're getting, which is, I guess I'm trying to understand, why is it that we're not being able to keep the 8 and 16 system we currently have, even if we do change over to the alternative form of pensions? It seems like dropping down the contribution that we can give and the contribution the company gives doesn't seem to sort of reflect even the form of fairness that you were talking about before.
Sure. Thank you. In terms of the deficit, the total deficit across all our schemes is 450 million. Pace's slice of that is 104 or something in that region, I think. So they're real numbers, but the fact of it is that numerous times through the valuation discussions and through the last 3 years, that number has been considerably greater than even 450 million. Even for Pace, it's been as much as £1 billion, as I say, and that's set against a sophisticated and highly defensive investment strategy. That just tells you how big Pace is, and it's how sensitive it is to small changes in interest rates and such like. So the trustees issue an announcement every year. What they were talking about was that they'd secured a funding plan from the group. So the 55 million I referred to, they get a big slice of that to repay their deficit. The trustees' responsibility is to pass. So what they were saying is the deficit's actually not bad at all by UK pension standards, and we've got a funding plan, and we think the group is good for that. We think it's good for the duration of that recovery plan because their biggest concern is protecting what's been built up. So that's a trustee statement, and I don't disagree with that. But what I would say is the group's view of the deficits they are running and the risks that they are running is really significant. We are a smaller business, sadly, than we were a few years ago. We're less able to withstand shocks. And even though we have a sophisticated investment strategy, the group's ability to be able to fund the deficit, should it be £1 billion, would generate a significant strain on the business and threat and rebuild. So in terms of the deficits, the DB position, I hope that answers the question. In terms of contributions, One of the things I looked at was, when we put the proposals together, could we still have a DB scheme? Could we still have a DB scheme which the group could live with the risk? So I've said that we've already got £10 billion of the pension liability. But could we have a scheme which actually protected the group in some way? So now I'll come back to your question about contributions in a second. We looked at a scheme which had 10% from the employee and 10% from the employer, and it was a DB scheme. But we'd have to invest in a way that exposed the group to no more defined benefit risk, to longevity risk and to inflation risk and such like. So it would have to be pretty prudently funded, and the assumptions would have to be prudent. The accrual rate for that scheme was 140ths, so 1/140th. So we're currently on a 60th basis, and that's where we got to with the DB design. I absolutely take the point about contributions. We're not denying the right and the opportunity to pay more into the scheme. If they want to pay more than 5, and there's a question actually I should have said as one of the themes that's come up is, I'm currently paying 8, I'm comfortable with paying 8, why are you moving down to 5? But people can still pay more. They absolutely can pay more. Encourage that, it's a tax efficient way to do it. But from an employer contribution, the group's saying with everything that's going on, with the DC costs rising, with the DB costs and the future valuations likely to provide a bigger pull on the group, 10%, it believes, is a fair contribution across the piece. Now, your feedback may well be, it should be more than that. And as I say, that is one of the themes. But the scheme's been designed in a way to provide a decent level of pension provision, also in a way that means that we don't threaten our ability. Careful workings were done. We're expecting, expect a challenge in many ways in terms of the way in which we designed it. But we did look at a DB solution, but couldn't find one that would fly, and that I felt was a good enough proposition. Carl?
Yeah, Carl Cook, more from my many questions I've been asking for the team. I've got 3 questions for me.
Callum, can you speak as loud as you can so that you can hear?
One important fact we missed off on this first slide about the history of the pensions was that those in the DB scheme had to pay increased contribution rates, and it wasn't detailed on the slide. Now, from the literature I've read on this, there seems to be agreement with the union, and the wording was certainly along the lines of this was to then give a sustainable DB scheme going forward, where an unpalatable step already had to be taken by all members of the DB scheme over 2 years, several years ago. So what's changed since then? Because it does feel a little bit disingenuous that we had to pay more, and then that itself is not materialising as we expected. So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is it's clearly there are about 8,000 people who are going to be severely disadvantaged by this. And I do use what considered manner because they are severely disadvantaged by this. Do you feel that that's appropriate, given we are co-operative, and that those are the 8,000 people who chose with knowledge to over-invest or to invest more than others who chose not to at that juncture? And in many respects, I find the slide which says that we are paying 90% of the pension to 10% of the people who slightly misuse of some of the facts, because in fact, if you were to look at the contribution rate of those people who are inverted commas receiving divorces, is obviously disproportionate as well. And then the third question I have for me is I'm the director of reward and pensions. So by looking at your pie charts of where people are sitting, one would guess that that's been a degree of risk analysis and fear of some form of attrition rate where people have joined this business on lower salaries as a part of the pension offer being appealing and joining, including myself. Does your unfortunate position allow you to consider what mitigating or minimising steps may be taken by the group to compensate or minimise that hit to those most affected? Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Okay, starting with the first question in terms of increased contributions. That was on the back of the employer contribution going on, the last valuation. Not the last one, the one before that. We asked people to pay more as a share of the cost. There was no guarantee that the pension scheme would be available forever. No responsible employer would commit to that. What we asked people to do was to pay more to their pension. So somebody said to me that their pension had been missold. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to say, because the contribution you've made in that 1 year, your 8%, goes to the pension brick that you build up, that's yours. That will be protected, that will be linked to inflation. So people have paid towards pension, and the group has paid its contribution as well, and that's locked down for you. But I think it's important that we don't get drawn into the belief that by asking people to pay more, it was a statement that we could keep the scheme open indefinitely, because that wasn't said at any point. Secondly, with regard to whether it's appropriate, I think that was the theme in terms of the proposition. I would say this, and I mean this so sincerely, is first and foremost, the job is to protect what's been built up. That is the primary reason here for the change, to protect your accrued pensions. And I think that is absolutely vital that we do that. So even now, we talk about a reduced contribution. For instance, the gentleman before asked the question about reduced contribution. It's only 10% versus the 18% that's currently being paid. And we can all do the maths there, I see that. But what I'd also ask people to bear in mind is the group is paying for the past, for our past. So the group is paying, the 55 million is paying, for every one of you that's in the DB scheme, it's paying something for the past for you, for me, for you. So it isn't quite as simple as a direct correlation between the current contribution that the group pays and the one it's going to pay into the DC scheme. But I absolutely accept it's less than it was. And in terms of the issue around my broader role and compensation, this is something that has come through. The trade unions have raised this. If the DB scheme can't be maintained, is there a way in which DB members can be given something extra to make that in some way right, or to make it whole in some way? That isn't part of this proposition. Fair reward, some of you will know within the group, there is a drive to make sure that we are fairly rewarding people across the group, and that they are paid in an appropriate way, and their benefits, including pensions, stack up against what we believe and where we believe we should be in the market. So that's something we will look at as part of the Fair Reward programme. But in terms of compensation or an additional DC contribution, that isn't part of the proposal. But again, I would just say if that's something you feel should form part of the solution, then I'd encourage you to put that feedback in.
We keep saying that the group will honour its commitments to those past promises, that those benefits are locked down. Those benefits are clearly not locked down. You keep attacking and chipping away at them year after year. We were in the final salary scheme, then now we're not in the final salary scheme. We did have benefits in the final salary scheme, now we haven't. From October, that's it. You say, well, that's protected against inflation. Actually, it's inflation capped at 5%, which is relevant, and I think you should say if you don't. But the former trustee makes an interesting point with the underpinning to inflation up to 2016. I would not be surprised if you put this through in 2015, and then in 2016 you change it again, and those deferred benefits are not linked to inflation. So I don't trust you on that. You know, why would I trust you? You keep chipping away and devaluing what I believe was something that would quite a secure trust.
Gary, people on YouTube are asking if you can summarise the question before you answer it.
Blimey, that's an interesting one to start with. One was that I'm not trustworthy, and was actually that I was misrepresenting the way in which accrued pensions have been built up, and the way in which we've devalued the promise, I think, over time. That's a good point. I don't agree with it, and I'll share with you why I don't agree with it. Pensions are protecting legislation. So the group, no employer could take away the inflation link. That is a legislative requirement. So what you built up, both in final salary and career average terms, that pension that you built up will increase in line with inflation in accordance with the scheme rules. That's enshrined in legislation. The group can't take that away at any stage. And again, it pains me to say this, but it's no coincidence that there are so few defined benefit schemes left over, because the cost and risk is so significant. So I understand why there's a concern that actually this will change again. And actually, one of the themes that's coming through in consultation has been, what's to stop you reducing these contribution rates further? You say the DC scheme has a tier of 5 and 10. What's to say that you won't change it? Well, I would say in response to that, I think part of the consultation, maybe one of the feeds in should be, you get a commitment from the group about what the contribution will be. The group's in rebuild at the moment. Would it be unreasonable to ask the group to increase once we're out of rebuild? So it can't erode the past. The past is the past, and it is linked to inflation. I'm sorry that you feel I've been disingenuous in that. It's not been my intention at all. It's very complex nuances within how pension increases and how revaluation pension schemes work. But that is protected, and it is linked to inflation. And yes, there could be changes in the future. Do I think there'll be another pension review at some stage? What employer would say no to that? But I think there is an opportunity through consultation to say there is a requirement from colleagues that it is reviewed, but positively reviewed going forward.
There is a government scheme now, isn't there, that protects members of pension schemes where the employer goes bust.
Yeah, there is.
And if you have retired, you get the full amount of that deferred benefit, defined benefit. And if you are a contributing member but not a pensioner, you would get 90% of the benefit. So being really hard-headed about it, I would be better off with you continuing with this risk and maintaining my final salary link and gambling on you not meeting those pension liabilities and get 90% of my final salary service, not 60.
The question was around the pension protection fund, and would you be better off just sort of saying, well, we can tell with it, we'll just crack on, and whatever happens, because we've got the pension protection fund safety net. The pension protection fund doesn't pay all of your pension benefits. It pays a proportion of what you've built up at that time. The pensions regulator, obviously, his job is to make sure that employers don't go bust in the sense that the pension scheme drags them down into it. The pension scheme can't be supported by the employer, it falls into the pension protection fund. So the pensions regulator has a very keen interest in our scheme. And certainly with the troubles with the bank, the regulator is very keen to understand the security of the £10 million. So the questions from the regulator are all about what are you doing to protect those pensions that have been built up. So nobody wants to go into the pension protection fund. No scheme as big as ours has gone into the pension protection fund. We pay a levy into the pension protection fund of millions of pounds every year, like all DB pension schemes do. So I personally wouldn't want to take that risk with my own pension. I don't know how many other people would, by the applause, maybe lots of you would, but the risk rests with the group. And whilst the group is continuing through rebuild to keep on building additional defined benefit pension in the way that we are, in the manner that we are, puts the business under significant strain. Yes, sir.
It's slightly different, but you keep going on about the group. But one of the things that really gets on my vote is the fact that if you look at the last two annual statements, the level of reward for the executive that has been paid is well in excess of 20% of just on the basic calculations. Now, the majority of them are no longer here, but they've walked off with those contributions to their own benefits. They're not even part of the group scheme. So I think if you're taking the pain as an individual, I would like to think in the future that the executive, which seems to be pretty much a revolving door over the last couple of years, that they then don't get the benefits, or they have to, it's like more to some sort of performance rather than a negotiated amount of money that they get contributed into their pension fund. But I think it's quite obscene when they talk about 13 million or something. A big chunk of that is getting out the door in the last 12 months, and they're no longer contributing in any way.
In terms of exec pension policy, I can't really comment on the past as such. There's lots of history in our pension schemes. Many of you remember that a number of our pension schemes were non-contributory for years. So nobody paid in. No employees paid into them, the business paid. So it's difficult to look at then and also look at now. But what I will say about the current executive position is that the pension offer is clearly stated in their report accounts. So the executive are offered a membership of the pension scheme in the same way that everybody else is, or a salary supplement up to 16%, which was broadly the same as the employer contribution. We didn't increase it. When the employer contribution went from 16 to 18, we kept the exec pension policy with a 16% salary supplement. I have written to the executive in the same way that I've written to all of our colleagues to say there is a cost and risk review on pensions, and whether you are in a pension scheme or not in a pension scheme, or you receive a salary supplement, you are part of that review. So we've been very clear, and as I say in the themes that we've received, one of the key themes has been, are we all in this together? So the group will clearly be held to account on that and to respond on that as part of the consultation.
I've got a question from YouTube on the affordability of employee contributions. Ian Taylor talks about going through an exercise in a change of pension scheme in the 80s and again in the 90s, and found it hard to pay an increased employee contribution. Essentially, his pay rise went to fund those contributions. He asks how he's going to afford to pay the employee contributions if the proposals are implemented.
Assuming the gentleman's in the DB scheme, the contribution would go down. He would be asked to pay 5% rather than the current 8%. But I think that sort of plays to a wider point, Matt, maybe, which is actually where I go to with the financial well-being piece. We've got to change how we help people understand their pension position, because the modeler was intended to show people what they're currently built up and show what the DC scheme would give them at a various range of retirement ages. We've got to get much better at helping people understand what income they need in retirement. Because actually, if you give me a benefit statement, age 40, about what that might be in 25 years' time, how much use is that really? It doesn't necessarily mean anything. What we've got to start doing is telling people and helping people understand about what income they need in retirement. So the government produce statistics and say, 70% of your income is required in retirement if you're around £20,000. So you've got to try and find that income replacement. So you need to build a state pension in, you need to build in your pension from the group, and whatever else you need to pay in to get to that place. So I think the demand on contributions, I guess, in many ways, will be the fact that people feel the need to pay more than they were paying before because the group's paying less. I understand that. We need to help people understand what it is they need to pay to get the appropriate level of income in retirement. It's part of an education and a wellbeing piece. And I want to secure some support from group to do this in a really meaningful way over the next few years.
We have an anonymous question from a text, which asks if the group's considered a hybrid DB-DC scheme.
Yes, we did. We did consider that in the same way that I was looking at a DB scheme, which was at a lower accrual rate, which had no risk to the group. But as I say, we just couldn't find a solution which we felt was worthy and was truly valuable to colleagues. I mean, some employers out there have accrual rates at over 100s. Yes, it's a DB scheme, but it's almost a DB scheme by name only, and not terms in terms of meaningful benefit. Yes, sir.
John, I don't think anybody would violently disagree that investments are giving the returns that they've historically done, and that there may be a need to pay slightly more. It wasn't that long ago that we were asked to increase. And to put that into perspective, we paid an extra third. And if we pay, say, 10%, I'll then be paying 2/3 more than I paid previously. And first and foremost, I want to plan for my retirement. And the proposals don't allow me to plan for my retirement. So my biggest frustration is at a time when investments aren't generating enough, why is the business cutting their rate on the matrix? Why should I accept 6% less?
I understand that. Much of for YouTube, the question was around retirement planning and the fact that the group's contribution is considerably less under the proposals for DB members than it is currently. It is about affordability. The group is saying there's a finite amount of money to spend on pensions, to pay for the past and also to pay for the future, to cut its cloth accordingly and rebuild. It's deemed that a 10% contribution is what it can afford to pay, and as I say, pay to honour the past. I appreciate that would mean potentially that it's less in income terms in the future. We will encourage people, and this isn't just a one-off, we need to make sure, as I just said to the previous question, to help people understand what income they do need in return.
The question is, why should I expect less from the business? And if we talk about fairness as a process, then pro rata. If people want to put in X, give them Y in return. So fix the link for fairness. But I don't see why I should pay substantially more for less. And then I will have much worse, fundamentally much worse pension.
Can I just clarify when you say you'll pay substantially more? Because you would make up the difference.
Yeah, so I've gone from 6 to 8. There's a third more contribution. If I go for 8 to 10, that's 2/3 more I'm paying. And you're paying significantly less. Where's the logic? Where's the motivation?
I would encourage you to feed that back in the consultation.
I am. I'd like to know why I should accept less.
I can't answer that question why you should accept less. I'm saying this is the group's proposal around cost and risk.
Okay, so can you or have you considered pro rata? You used the example earlier of what an EB contribution would be. You quoted 20%. Well, it should be 20%. If I go to 10, 26. So what would that give us? You quoted 140 instead of 1010, but that's not where we are currently. So what would we have to do to maintain, or have you considered that pro rata scenario?
Well, one of the key drivers in the proposal is to manage cost and risk. So we have to cut our cloth accordingly, which is why we've come up with the DC scheme, which has no more DB liability to our 10 billion.
You could still create a pro rata scheme, so that what people get a pro rata element back.
You could, and as I said, I encourage you to feed that back in if you believe the contribution should be higher.
Basically, you're saying one of the reasons for the proposals is the current state of the business. Is it therefore appropriate to say, from an optimistic point of view, the business might improve going ahead, and therefore at this moment in time we accept 10% as a minimum from the group, but as the profits of the group increase over years, there's an automatic increase to the group's 10%. Is that a feasible thing to expect in return for our hit we are taking now as the group becomes more profitable, we'll be able to build that into the future?
I have heard that. So the question was about could the contributions be increased? Could a promise be made by the group to increase contributions when we are at a healthier place? I think it's a very valid question. Again, I would encourage you to input that to the feedback. The previous questions around could the offer be diminished? I think it's all in the same ballpark actually in terms of not diminishing the offer, improving the offer where possible, be that now or later. So I'd encourage you to provide that feedback. Contributions to a DC scheme are set by the employer, but actually do change and can change. So I think I think that's perfectly reasonable to ask the group to increase the contributions as time goes on, as they're in a better place.
Quite emotive, but I suppose it's quite straightforward. In terms of loyalty over the years, the roller coaster we've all been over at least the last 5 years. And I think the vast majority of people sitting here and elsewhere know what they brought to the group and how to keep it on course. There's an aspect in the underlying of this which shows the trail and trust going forward. A lot of it goes back to what we talk about the rebuild program. So if you take a view, I think some of us, that the rebuild program, which we financed in terms of what we're not getting back out of pension which was there before, without a clear idea of what's going to be going forward. So some of us are looking for more sort of guarantees in regard to what was put in the past. It becomes more harsh, I think, in the view of it when you're working for a cooperative movement, whatever else. And I think I said to you once before, and you said it wasn't part of the plan, but it appeared that we're discussing certain issues at the AGM that they said didn't actually come up at all, which I think a significant number of the members would have thought was very, very relevant and wonder why it was discussing after the event. Given the fact that the vast majority of the membership now is made up of actually the employee. My concern is that once again we will let up the garden path in regard to these matters?
Yeah, I'm sorry that's the way you feel. I mean, again, I just reiterate the point I made at the start that nobody's more wedded to defined benefit than me. Nobody, I think, understands this pension scheme better than me. Nobody understands the risk that the defined benefit pension scheme poses potentially to the group, a pension scheme of this size. And to stand in front of you today, I can tell you absolutely that I believe the right thing to do is to make the changes and to stop accruing defined benefit pension. Because first and foremost, we must protect what we've built up. That's absolutely essential. So we've got to honour that promise. I know people talk about the promise, and some people believe the promise would be that DB would be provided for their entire career. In my world, the promise is very much about what's been built up. But I understand that. I understand the anger. And that's come through in the consultation feedback. As I say, what I would urge people to do, though, is to recognise the fact that first and foremost, we've got to protect what we've built up.
The TCG defined benefit final sum scheme stopped in 2006. 9 schemes, presumably companies that we bought, were stopped in 2012. So of the £450 million deficit, black hole, right, that there currently is, have all of those schemes contributed equally to that 450, or are there some schemes that are a bigger risk? And might an approach be to tackle those? Because the 9 schemes closed in 2012. One, they've got 6 years extra service, but also they've not been TCG employees for all that time. So would there be an approach where TCG deferred benefit members, defined benefit members, were treated, that scheme treated differently, if that was less a risk?
So the questions around the makeup of our pension schemes, about £10 billion, and whether the deficits have been equally accrued. Every one of our schemes has a deficit. Different levels of deficit, different levels of funding. They have had additional accrual between 2006 and 2012. Having said that, you can't stop accrual before you're responsible for the pension scheme. So a number of those pension schemes came to the group between 2006 and 2012. So they may have joined us thinking of the merger dates in 2009 or 2010. So we obviously couldn't be stopped before then. We undertook a considerable review to manage down pension responsibilities and liabilities, which is why we did the 2012 review. I think it would be very difficult to try and work out a solution whereby former group employees, say, could carry on their DB scheme, but people who are in a less well-funded scheme, say in the United North West scheme, didn't. I think that would be extremely difficult to manage. All of our schemes do exist separately, so they have their own funding strains and their own demands. I don't know if you know this, but from a group point of view, when we sold the life and savings business, and also when we sold the pharmacy business, contributions were paid out of sales to the pay scheme, not to the schemes, to the pay scheme. So the pay scheme got a funding boost as a direct result of those sales. So I understand what you're saying, but I think it would be extraordinarily difficult to try and devise a solution which took the past into account in terms of who paid what and what the funding position of those schemes is.
Gary, so I'm conscious that we're pushing for time. Can we just get probably 2 more quick questions in, and then we'll need to be drawing to a close for Gary, because he's done an awful good stint tonight.
Just a quick question about the proposed scheme. There's something written here about associated dependents, but not being defined until October 2015.
In terms of life cover, the extra life cover.
I'm wondering why that is defined, because when we're looking at an offer, it's hard to.
Yeah. So yeah, regarding the offer of an extra 3 times life cover for PACE DB members, so we would pay 6 times if they were to die in service. And yeah, we're not being intentionally vague in terms of that. This is a proposal, so we haven't actually written the scheme rule, if you like, that pays 6 times. What I can say is we will just simply replicate the same definition as the 3 times that you have in the scheme. So 3 times is payable to spouse, dependents, people like you know, there's a specific definition there. The intention for the extra tea times will be exactly the same. But right now, is it written and stated what it is? No, but then we don't have it right now. But again, I can give an assurance to this room, we will not be trying to create a category or a benefit, if you like, that only applies in certain circumstances. It will mirror the pay scheme. That's exactly how it will be written in practice.
One more question, please, thank you.
I'm just wondering if you could explain, I'm not into the benefit scheme, so I'm trying to understand what the situation we're in going forward for this complete, I think it is. But my question is around when we went through into acquisition to businesses like Summerfield and Victoria, I'm guessing their pensions would be part of those 9. Was there not provision made at that point by those businesses to contribute to pension costs? Because of my understanding from what you said today is your commitment is to the people that are already in existence in the pension pot, not to people that are joining or coming in it or might be in the future. And that's where your commitment is, and that's what you have to protect. But was there anything put in place at that point to actually recognise that they're made very good in terms of what was being provided as a benefit by those businesses? And then has that been factored in? Because it feels like when they say talking about your commitment to those people that are already in the top, but what about those that are now contributing in the future? Because it feels like we are all losing out about business deals that we've done previously, and actually should that be part of the negotiation? And can I just ask a quick question, just out of clarity? It would be really good if there would be a way that we could actually quickly see what we would have got and what we would actually get, because if we're trying to understand, there is a way of doing that on an individual basis. So that's just a quick point.
I'm not sure how to answer your first question, if I'm honest. I'm not sure I absolutely understand what's at the heart of the question.
The point is that you're saying that the initial commitment to those people who are paid into pension funds, and that needs to be protected. So in terms of why we find ourselves where we are when we're consolidating 10 pensions into one, was there not provision made at the point of business deals being made to cover pensions as part of that? And should there not be as big a commitment to the business now? Should that provision not be made at the point of acquisition or merger or agreeing to go into business? So I think part of it may be because of the complexities of cooperative societies, I don't know. But if you took Summerfield as an example, it's a private company or whatever, would they not have had to have had a pension pot, and should that not transfer over? Is it as simple as that?
Yeah, well, they did. Every business that we've acquired brings a pension scheme with it. So every one of them, so Summerfield brought a pension scheme with it. When the acquisition was, or the merger was discussed and reviewed, that pension scheme would have been known. The makeup of that pension scheme would have been known. The funding position of that pension scheme would have been known. So you would be aware of it. When you buy the business, you take on the pension scheme, which is why we ended up with 10 pension schemes. The challenge with defined benefit pension schemes is, though, that the cost has risen phenomenally since even 2006. And, you know, I can see the gentleman shaking his head in front of me, but let me just tell you that the cost of pensions, this is an absolute fact. The costs of pensions, defined benefit pensions, have increased phenomenally. I think that a career average DB scheme with the 6th accrual rates could require a contribution somewhere between 30 and 40% of pay. Absolutely not. Jared, you want a trustee, you'll remember contributions in around 10 and 20% maximum. I never thought we'd get to that. And the reason is because schemes have to take less risk. The pensions regulator to make sure that there's extra prudency in the assumptions. So consequently, that just drives up the cost. So we did know, the business did know what it was taking on, but like all businesses, I don't think it truly appreciated what the long-term costs of defined benefit pension schemes are. And most schemes in the UK, most businesses in the UK are living with huge long-term pension liabilities that whatever they do for the future, they pay for the past. So I don't know if that answers your question, but certainly in terms of, was it known at the time? Yes. Do you take the pension scheme on? Yes. And when I talk about the responsibility that responsibility is being met now for all the businesses that we acquired. There'll be people in this room, I guess, that work for other cooperative societies that joined us in recent times. We're responsible. We are on the hook, group is on the hook for all of that pension that's been built up. But I know you pointed out, the last point about the defined benefit. Did you say you weren't in the scheme? Which is back to my financial well-being point. A couple of years' time, I hope people really will understand, because what I've learned through this is actually that people's level of understanding isn't where we need it to be and where they need it to be. And I think it's something we should seek a commitment from the group to fund financial well-being.
Can I just add to that? And I think as part of that, remember, 2008 financial crisis we had then, that the pension could be worth less than what we put into it, you know. So, you know, I hope from that point of view, you're very, very clear that a defined contribution scheme, the risk is on the individual and not on the society. And I think that's where we have to be really clear. So it's very clear to say, this is what you need to say for the X, Y, and Z based on what is agreed by the Financial Services Authority and what you can actually produce. However, it is that the risk is now on the individual. And that if you, in say 10, 15 years' time, we go back to the same financial crisis that we did in 2008 and you retire the next day, then unfortunately, I'm sorry, the court will help you.
Thanks very much. Listen, guys, I noticed that looking at the time, and obviously we want to actually get a few more things in, but I want to just say thank you very much, Steve, for Gary. Sterling worked tonight in the presentation. That's a lot of very awkward questions. So thank you for the very awkward questions. From the NACO perspective, it's great you've got that, and thanks again. See you again. I think we just want to.
I just want to add something before the people from the society go. They reiterated a number of times that you must feed in your feedback, because we asked the question at the last meeting and they are not noting what is said either at the sessions that you've been having in the workplace and at meetings like this. So you can't assume that you've made that point tonight that they've noted all of that. I know Andy Clark has been making notes throughout, but that's a really important point that you mustn't go away thinking, well, I made that point and that's no, I'm not saying you've ignored it, but without you continuing to give that feedback firstly to the society and then to the union, then that those points are not necessarily clearly taken on board.
Thanks, Gwen. I just want to, Gary, do you need to leave, mate?
No, I was thinking you were going to.
No, please leave. No. I think you've had enough tonight, so well done. Paul has been going through presentations in his sleep, I think. He's been doing those for about every day for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So thank you very much for your time and coming tonight, and thank you for your questions. So